Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. Realize that it was a brief lunch break. Um, just a couple of issues first. We, the steering committee, have been working really hard on pulling together the conference and have yet to have some of the conversations about next steps. And so I see some of the comments in the Q&A, and I think that, one of the things we'd like to do, for example, is create a resource page on the website, and we may be able to get the panelists who are willing to do so to share their slides. If they do that, then please know that panelists sharing slides, those should be shared under the condition that those slides will not be altered without the panelists' permission. I want to respect the creation of the panelists. Also, as Moyar mentioned earlier, we by sometime next week, depending on how her jury duty goes, we hope to have both English and Spanish recordings up on the website as well. And so you will hear more from us. I can email registered attendees about the availability of those recordings once we have them. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We had two really engaging sessions this morning and two very interesting sessions this afternoon. The one that I'm going to moderate now is called How Do MLMs Silence Critics? And then our last session of the day will be Product and Earnings Claims and the True Numbers. And that's an issue, of course, that many people have become familiar with over time. I think we'll just go ahead and I'll get started with our first panelist and have the rest of the panelists go ahead and turn your cameras and mics off. And our first panelist for this afternoon session is Alonda Carter. She's an instructional design professional and YouTube content creator known far and wide as the Recovering Hunbot. All right. Alonda,
so I'm on, huh?
You are on, and Joshua and Peter, if you could close off your video.
And yes, I'm known far and wide. Let me share my screen. And so, hey, I usually am recording everything. And so if I mess up, I can do another take. And this time there is no redo. So I have notes on the screen. I have notes down here. And so you'll probably see me looking around because that's just how I roll. Okay, let me see which I want to share this one. And then hopefully I'm doing this correctly. Okay, can you guys see where it says the Recovering Hunbot? Is that what you're seeing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, like you said, my name is Alonda Carter, and I am the Recovering Hunbot. I say that on every video, I think. Anyway, I want to tell you a little bit about how I got involved with multi-level marketing, so that kind of, paints the story a little bit, the beginning of it. I had recently gotten remarried, and it wasn't even a year into the marriage, and I found out I had breast cancer. I survived, obviously. I'm here, and I'm very grateful for that. But I wasn't treated very well by my employer, specifically my manager. So I was kind of not doing real well mentally. The day that I went back, no more radiation or anything, was the day that I was laid off. So I was like a prime candidate and very vulnerable. My husband and I, we moved to another community, and one of my neighbors lived on the same floor, was part of Beachbody. I ended up joining Beachbody in 2016. And I will say this, I did all the things. I worked my butt off. I don't think I've ever worked so hard in my life. I mean, I've gone through 2 graduate programs, and that is so easy in comparison. Well, fast forward to 2019, and horror of horrors, I discovered that I was a Hunbot. It's like, oh my gosh, what is this Hunbot thing? Hence, I'm the Recovering Hunbot. A Hunbot, the way that I describe it, is from the copy paste messages, the hey hun, the hey girl messages, and sometimes there's a copy fail, and then you become robotic. And so hence the Recovering Hunbot. Well, I decided once I realized what had happened to me, because I had no idea what MLM was when I joined Beachbody, no clue. I decided I needed to understand this animal. I wanted to start unlocking this beast and just peeling it apart. So I started doing research, which that's typically what I do, but it's not what I did when I joined Beachbody. I mean, I didn't look at anything because I knew this person, I trusted this person, and I'm like, if she can do it, I can do it. But that was a nut that I couldn't crack no matter what I did. Anyway, since I started doing YouTube, people have tried to silence me with mob dislikes, disparaging comments, privacy claims, copyright claims, threats of defamation. So it's been like all of this stuff, but it's been a very small segment that has come after me. And this is basically the story of what has happened when people came at me because of my videos. If you happen to hear a thumping noise, my dog Chalupa, I think, is itching. And so that's what that is. All righty. So it so happened that one of my friends in the anti-MLM community, she had heard of these characters, Darren and Mike. Now, I now use TV Darren and Mike because even though these people are public figures, they seem to be very sensitive about having their image shown. So I just will put up, TV Darren and Mike because it's just easier that way. And back when I made my first video on this, I was teeny tiny in terms of a content creator. I think I had barely had 1,000 subscribers, maybe close to 2. I don't really remember. And the views on the video were not that much. It was under 1,000. And that's when the mob attack started happening. I mean, just thumbs down, thumbs down, thumbs down, which was very different from my other videos. And also just really crappy, mean comments, just ad hominem attacks. It was just like, wow, I hope you feel good about yourselves because that's like really crappy behavior. But, since I had tried to understand what was going on, I had reached out to Doug Brooks. I had reached out to Robert Fitzpatrick because I wanted to surround myself with people who had gone before me and started looking into this stuff because the real me came back. I had been my MLM personality, but now I was starting to become, my true self once again. And I believe Stephen had spoken about that. And that's really, how I felt too, is that I was a completely different person. I was fundamentally transformed. Okay, moving on. All right, so this is what's really funny. So during all this, like, okay, we can't stand your video. How dare you make this video? And these awful comments, somebody left this on my Facebook page that I'm a scam. And it's like, okay, exactly how does that work? I'm the scam because I am doing research and using your own documentation and talking about it. I'm the scam. What really I found odd is that since I was such a small creator, they seem to be very threatened by me. And I'm like, why? Why are you getting your panties in a twist? I mean, it's just one video, really? But then it continued, I mean, it just continued. And that's when I got my first cease and desist, threatened with defamation. And it's like, again, it's like, my gosh, I'm not that big of a deal. I'm this small little creator, but okay. And when this happened, I contacted Doug because I'm like, look, this went down. Is there anything you can do to help me? And he graciously did help me. Well, and then this is what happened. It was the privacy complaint. And that's how they were able to get my video removed. All of the people that were mentioned and whose images were shown on that video were all public figures. And there was no way for me as a creator to go like, wait, these were public figures. I had no recourse from YouTube when that privacy claim was made. So when that happened, I'm like, okay, I can learn from this. So that's when I started really doing more like blurring out people and also sticking emojis over faces because it's like, you're so sensitive, even though these two guys, it's Darren and Mike, Tuesdays and Thursdays, they do a standing webinar, but you don't want anybody else talking about you. Okay. I'm just like, why? Why am I such a threat? So I started digging more because that's, again, what I do normally, not when I joined MLM, but with this, I'm like, yeah, let me look at this more. And so I remade the video, and this time they couldn't claim privacy because, I'm taking care of those things. And I just continued to make more videos because I found that there was just more dirt. They are associated with the MLM called Enagic now. Enagic is going to say we're not MLM. That's what a lot of these companies do. But when you really start looking at them, it's like you've got a complex pay structure. There's this need to recruit. There's this product that, you only can get from distributors. There's like all of these things that on the loaded language, there's so many things. It's like, well, if you look like a duck, sound like a duck, walk like a duck, you're a triangular duck to me. And so then I got this, take down notice, but YouTube stood by me when it came to the copyright because of fair use. But what I think they really got upset about is the fact that what I did is I looked at their free webinar. Now, in my world as an instructional designer, when it comes to webinars, they've always been used as an instructional tool. So I call these seminars because they only have them because it's a funnel to get you to go to the next step. And in their case, you watch the free webinar and they're selling you the concept that you can start your own online business. They don't say what it is. Shh, don't want to tell anyone, don't want to mention it. And after you decide like, okay, I want to do this thing, even though you don't know what it is, you get this course, but it doesn't unlock everything. It unlocks part of it because then you can take a coaching call. That coaching call is actually people who are members of Enagic that are part of Darren and Mike's Dream Team group on Facebook. And now they are taking these calls because they want you to join Enagic. As soon as you join Enagic, then you can sell it and you become a distributor. But that machine is $5,000, or if you go for the trifecta, that's $10,000. And this happens over and over and over again. Like I said, every Tuesday and Thursday is the webinar. They're still doing them. And I was like, wow, how can you do that? And the thing is, once you do, you say yes to their opportunity, you start making Facebook ads. They don't tell you how much you're going to be spending on Facebook ads itself. And maybe you'll find a winning ad right away, maybe not, but they want people to sell their Facebook ads for like spend $10 a day. But when you start adding that up, $10 a day, a lot of people end up not being able to afford that for the week, for the month. And how can you really compete against other people who have gone before you, or people who are really good at copywriting? Because guess what? That's a skill in and of itself. All of this marketing is a skill that you do learn, or you can learn, but not necessarily in this way. So I just continued to make, more videos and cover up their faces and everything. And they would come at me again with the whole privacy thing and the whole, copyright takedown. But YouTube was like, nope, we are going to let this slide. And so it did. The thing is on YouTube, if you like, dislike, comment, it doesn't matter what you do. It's the algorithm, and the algorithm sees it as interaction, and it will push it out more, especially like within the first hour. So as they were trying to suppress me, I was just becoming more visible. And it's not like my videos have gotten, like millions of views or anything, but they're out there. And it's like really through their own stuff did I decide I'm going to like look at this even more because, why not? And one of the things that I did find, I think maybe I hid the video, but I'm sorry, the slide. But one of the things that I found is the Better Business Bureau. These guys are located in Canada. And Canada, the Better Business Bureau, had like all these questions for them that they have never responded to. And I thought, isn't this interesting? And it's that kind of stuff that I would continue to share as I'd find more information. Now, what they have done is they have kind of changed a little bit because their YouTube, all of the videos used to be out there for the public to see. But now they started making some private, and that was their webinar, their replay. Now you can't see it that way. And I thought, isn't that interesting? But they were still sending people to hate on my videos. So strange. But I'm not the only person that have thought of them as like, what they're doing is a little bit on that scammy side, because I found some information over on foundscam.com. But Darren and Mike are not the only people who are associated with Enagic who have this kind of training platform, if you will. And as an instructional designer, that's someone who designs and develops training. If you've ever had compliance training that you've had to take, or you go to work and you go to some, workshop or something, well, there's someone who has to create that material. That's what I do. So anyway, like I said, these are not the only people with these training platforms, all these like back doors to really get you to do MLM, but they're not going to say that up front. It's all very, very secretive. Another group of people that did this is the ACE Initiative. And I had made a video about them as well, and they came after me. And so during all of this, and again, I asked Doug about it, I got a cease and desist from them as well. And as this was going on, somebody contacted me who had actually got their little like course thing. And so I did a video with Liv. And eventually they kind of like dropped away, but there's still some other stuff on them that I'm going to be making at some point. But again, they're not the only ones. There's also the breakaway movement connected to Enagic, that they're really big in Australia. So I've done several videos on the breakaway movement too, because they're very, very big into the whole idea of being a digital nomad. And, very kind of woo, very much the law of attraction is embedded in it. And another group that does the same thing has a platform, a training platform. They were GAZ, Global Affiliate Zone, and now they're just the Affiliate Institute. And Enagic did get them to, they sent them a letter of some sort because how they're running their business was considered wrong, going against compliance. And here you can see there's a whole bunch of these training platforms all connected to Enagic. Now, everywhere where there's like red on it, I've either heard of it or I've mentioned it in one of my videos. This comes from Anna's analysis, her blog. She also has a YouTube channel, and she, goes into that in more in depth. What I've done is I've taken a piece out of each one and I've done a video on a specific one. Hers is like kind of like encompasses the whole thing. Now, like I said, I was the MLM personality when I was in all of this, and they really, really vilify the 9 to 5. That's just like the worst thing in the world, because you're going to get all this freedom, financial freedom, time freedom, all the freedom in the world. But in reality, you're not. In my opinion, you become enslaved to the dream, to whichever, just slap any MLM name on there. It doesn't really matter what it is. When you really look at them, they're all the same. It's just a different product, a different service, a different name, and that's it. So what I do now is I use a lot more disclaimers, and I also try to focus on public figures, because there are some people that will go after kind of like the stay-at-home moms, and like they will expose them. But since I've gone through all of this, and with the privacy claims and everything, I'm blurring out faces, I'm slapping on emojis, I'm doing something that I can in order to try to protect myself and my videos, because I want my content to get out there. And one of the things that they will leave these disparaging comments is like, what a hater I am. Like, we're all just a bunch of haters. And the thing is, I'm not a hater. I'm probably more concerned about these people than the people running these companies, because I don't want anyone else to be taken advantage of, to have gone through a difficult time in their life and think that this opportunity is going to be the answer. And what most people don't do is do that research. And we heard yesterday a bunch of the regulators talking about basically a checklist you can go down. You're not thinking right. You're not thinking, let me go look at a checklist and let me figure this out. You have already been indoctrinated into this whole new thought process. So what I'm doing now is like leaning on the fair use, using more disclaimers. And I also go deeper and deeper and deeper into my research, because I really want to like look at the people who are at the top of some of these. I have looked at MLMs that are like in Austria, some that have been in the Philippines, just around the world, because it's not just a US problem. And typically people here in the US, they will watch the videos made about the US companies, especially the ones that people hate the most. But if it's any of the other ones, it's like, oh no, we don't want to learn about that. But I'm putting that out there too. So that's my spiel, and thank you very much.
Alonda, thank you so much. And Alonda's put a lot of work into this, and you can see her YouTube channel, The Recovering Hunbot. And so you will stick around for our Q&A. Our next speaker is Peter Skolnick. Peter represents clients around the United States in media and entertainment litigation and counseling, and has spent 2 decades litigating against cults. Peter?
Are you letting me into the video? There I am.
I'm letting you in, and I'll go away.
All right. Well, as Bill just mentioned, I've spent much of the last 2 decades litigating against cults. And look, I'm aware that the principles of US law are not necessarily duplicated in many of the countries participating in this conference. So while the remedies, if any, that are available in the United States may not apply in your country, the ways that MLMs try to silence their critics tend to be pretty universal. The MLMs that I'm addressing, these are MLM cults that are not selling any product other than membership for self-improvement, or in the case of the religious cults, for salvation. Listening to the prior panel made it clear to me that the psychological dynamics work in much the same way, whether the MLM is selling Tupperware or lipstick or salvation and personal empowerment. My first involvement in this area came with litigation against Landmark Education. Landmark, as you may know, is the successor in interest to EST, Werner Erhardt's famous LGAT, large group awareness training from, I guess, the 70s. And Landmark is an LGAT, and I won't go into the ways in which they brainwash their members, but you know, these are sessions where you're there from 9 in the morning until midnight. Then you have to go home and come up with a list of all the people you're going to recruit the next day. And during the course of the day, if you speak, you're likely to be belittled. You're not allowed to go to the bathroom. It's a whole bunch of stuff. But at any rate, that was my first involvement. And my work on this stuff tends to be on the defense side rather than litigating against the cults. But in the case of Landmark, I was representing a fellow who had criticized them online, and they were trying very hard to get him shut down. Are all LGATs cults? Not in the traditional structure with an out in the open charismatic leader, but LGATs are almost invariably MLMs, and cults are almost invariably MLMs. The last panel discussed quite a bit about how they get you in. I'm going to talk a little bit about what cults do to keep you in. And if you escape and start bad-mouthing them, what they do to silence you. Now, granted, a lot of the principles and techniques of how they get you in and how they keep you in tend to overlap. Some of the same principles apply, whether it's on the come on in or don't go out. You know, they use cults that I'm talking about tend to have a fairly universal playbook. And the components are indoctrination, intimidation, litigation, and coercion in some mix. These cults also tend to have or exist with a broad spectrum of the ruthlessness with which they will go against their critics. An example that I probably know more about than any other, because I litigated against them for over a decade, and for that matter, Doug Brooks was working with me on a lot of the pieces of that litigation, was the litigation against Nexium. Now, several of you, I assume, know of Nexium now because of the recent criminal trial where the leader of Nexium, this fellow Keith Raniere, was tried and convicted and sentenced to 120 years. But my involvement with NXIVM was not on the criminal piece of it. It was on the decade of civil litigation that preceded him finally being caught and brought before a federal judge for a criminal trial. But NXIVM was an MLM in its structure. It had something called the sash path, where everybody in NXIVM wore a sash of a specific color. And as you became higher up in the chain of NXIVM, which generally meant how many people you have brought in to become members, you would get a green sash, a red sash, a pink sash, and the sashes designated how high up you were, and you bowed to anybody who you were talking to who was wearing a sash that showed they were higher up in the path. But the general structure in making your way through NXIVM depended upon how many people you brought in. And as is the case with most pyramid schemes, you earned money from all of those in the recruited group below you. Interestingly enough, this fellow Keith Raniere, who was the guru of NXIVM and is now in jail for the rest of his life and 3 other lives, he started out as a more traditional MLM. He was running something called consumer bylines, which was basically a scheme where if you bought in to consumer bylines for some ridiculous amount of money, you would be able to purchase all of your household goods at huge discounts because of the power of aggregating buying power. Anyway, that was determined by several states within the United States to be a violation. And Raniere ended up having to enter into a consent decree prohibiting him from any further involvement in pyramid schemes. But of course, NXIVM, the cult, is in fact a pyramid scheme. The way it worked is it required huge contributions or payments for the courses that you would take as a recruit into NXIVM. It was, in a sense, selling a product. It was selling Keith Raniere's technology, something called the rational inquiry method, which were 200 pages of psychobabble that he claimed were patented. They really weren't. And in most countries where he tried to get it patented, it was rejected outright. And in others, he would simply claim patent pending. But that was, if you will, the product that he was selling. If you leave NXIVM, in extreme cases, depending upon how much you have paid for courses before you sort of wake up and realize what you're involved with, very often you're broke. And if you are broke and file for bankruptcy and start criticizing NXIVM, they are likely to interfere in your bankruptcy proceeding. They will go into the bankruptcy court with some sort of bogus claims against you to try to convince the court why you should not be permitted to go bankrupt. And they have done that with several of their critics. They litigate against escapees. They litigate against outside critics. I've represented at various times both of those types. And in terms of the litigation that they are prone to, and several other cults like them, the extent of their litigation really it can be endless if they have a deep pocket to finance it. And in the case of NXIVM, they had 2 enormously deep pockets. They had members, the 2 Bronfman sisters, Claire and Sarah Bronfman, of the Seagram's liquor fortune. Sarah actually left a while ago. Claire not only stayed on, but Claire was charged and tried and convicted along with Ranieri when the criminal forces came down on them. But they were able to finance litigation probably to the tune of millions of dollars all over the country. And the case that I was involved with, the civil case, lasted for over a decade. It started in 2003. We finally got rid of the whole thing in 2016. But NXIVM, along the way, they sued their critics. They sued newspapers and magazines that published articles that mentioned what some of the critics were saying. In the case of my client, who was an outspoken critic, they set up a false interview through a third party, supposedly to interview him, to hire him. But the ultimate plan, by some accounts, was to get him onto a boat, a cruise, where he would be thrown overboard or in one way or another eliminated. They hired a private investigator to go through his garbage. They hired a Canadian company to obtain not only his banking records, but the banking records of all of their enemies, including a bunch of federal judges. I always remember that when I pointed out to the federal judge, the magistrate judge who was on our case, that they had gotten his banking records, his understated response was, "Well, that doesn't sound right." But at any rate, their litigation, they'll litigate for copyright infringement, for trademark infringement, for trade secret infringement, and certainly for defamation. And in the case of the litigation that I was involved with, they appealed and appealed and appealed all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, losing at every stage. But along with the civil litigation, they were constantly manipulating law enforcement to bring bogus criminal charges against their critics. In one case, I think they very likely planted child pornography against one of their critics by hacking into his system on the internet and planting this stuff. And at any rate, they thrived, NXIVM thrived for the best part of a couple of decades, but they finally were brought down when they went one hill too far, as they say. They formed, or when I say they, this fellow Keith Raniere formed what amounted to a cult within a cult. It was something called DOS, and DOS had various Latin translations, but it basically all boiled down to women who were the servants of a higher master. In order to become a member of DOS, you were sold on the idea that this was a very, very special, rarefied group of women. And in order to be allowed in, you had to put up collateral. The collateral would be certainly nude photos. And then you were also asked to put up what amounted to written family revelations. Whether they were true or not, you were told that you should be accusing your parents of tax evasion or accusing your father of child abuse. It didn't matter whether it was true. They just wanted to have this stuff as something to hold over you to keep you in DOS in case you ever had the temerity to decide to leave. And once you were indoctrinated into DOS and they had your collateral, the next step and the thing that really brought them down is the women, and all of the members of DOS were women. It was only Keith Raniere who was the only man involved. And of course, it was hidden that he was involved at all. All of the women were told that Raniere had nothing to do with DOS. All of these women were members of NXIVM, so they all knew who Raniere was, but they were assured that he had nothing to do with the group. But once you were thoroughly indoctrinated and you were given your collateral, and they kept on asking for more and more collateral as the weeks went by, you were then branded with Keith Ranieri's initials. And when I say branded, literally a cauterizing pen was used to inscribe his initials on the skin near your genitals, while other members of the group held you down. No anesthesia, just the searing flesh from a cauterizing pen. Well, once that became revealed, because at least one of the women who I ended up representing for a while for the press inquiries that came out once she revealed what had happened with us, once that became known, the branding, Ranieri decided it was time to get out of the country. So he fled to Mexico, and after, I don't know, about 6 months, I think, he was caught by Mexican and federal officials. He was brought back to the New York area. He was tried and he was convicted. And as I say, he was sentenced to 120 years in prison. During his run, his chief deputy was a woman named Nancy Salzman. Nancy was an expert in neuro-linguistic programming, which was mentioned in the last panel. Neuro-linguistic programming is a pseudo-scientific approach to communication and personal development psychotherapy. And it's probably her expertise in neuro-linguistic programming that made Ranieri decide that she would be a great partner for him. So she was also indicted for, among other things, doctoring evidence that had been provided to the court in our civil case. She pled guilty. She has not yet been sentenced. At any rate, that was NXIVM, and it took up the best part of a dozen years of my life.
We're getting close to sorry, Peter, we're going to get close to this part, ending this part of the section.
All right. Well, okay. I was about to start talking about my litigation against a South Korean church, or a South Korean cult that masquerades as a church, something called the World Mission Society Church of God. But why don't we leave that for the Q&A? Let me skip just to the end and give you my two primary rules of litigating against cults that are MLMs. If the MLM is a cult, you have to educate the judge. Most judges don't really understand how cults work, and the more you can educate them, the better off. Most important is to go for the financials. I learned that first with the Landmark case. It was my first MLM case. They sued my client for defamation. I convinced the court to require them to produce their financials to prove that they had been damaged, and they dropped the case. So if you go after the financials with MLMs, they are very likely to resist. And if they finally have to turn it over, then you are definitely in the driver's seat.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, Peter. Our next speaker, also a lawyer, is Joshua Colton, a litigator whose practice focused on media, intellectual property, advertising, trade practices, unfair competition, privacy, e-commerce, and commercial law. Joshua?
Hold on a second. Yeah. So thank you. I know we're running late, so Bill, don't hesitate to.
We're fine. We're fine.
Look out. I'll try and be brief, and I'll try not to repeat what other people have said. I apologize because of my trial schedule. I've been unable to attend the conference as I originally attended. So if I end up repeating things other people have said, I guess that means they're doubly true. But I apologize for that. I also apologize because I just had my second vaccine yesterday. So if I come across as somewhat less intelligent than I would like, blame the drugs. But let me start. You know, my background in some ways has some similarity to Peter's. I'm a general First Amendment lawyer. I represent, newspapers and cable channels and, the traditional First Amendment law, but I've gradually gotten into defending bloggers in general. And as we'll talk about, especially the right to speak anonymously. And my experience is similar in that I initially did a whole bunch of cases in which I was defending people who were allegedly defaming cults or otherwise harming them and got sued by them, and then sort of fell into the world of MLMs. People found me who saw what I'd done with cults and anonymity and came to me. And I want to emphasize something about the connection between cults and MLMs, just apart from technical questions of why you would call one the other. I mean, I would defend, as just a matter of opinion, calling anything a cult. You can call the Catholic Church a cult as a matter of First Amendment law. That's a matter of opinion. But the connection psychologically, and this goes to the thing that Alonda was talking about. Why is Alonda such a threat? Why do they go so crazy in terms of coming after her, both legally and non-legally? And I'll talk about non-legal too. And my take on it is that MLMs are like cults in the following sense, or I should say they're like really a very deep-rooted tradition in America. It's a cultural tradition, and ultimately I think it owes its origin to a certain religious strain in American religious life, which is the notion that you can be as powerful as you want to be, you can be as successful as you want to be, that everything comes down to your own belief in yourself and quelling your self-doubts, whether they come from the devil or come from some part of your soul, whatever. The idea is that success in life is entirely up to you, and you believing in yourself and believing that the obstacles that seem to face you are imaginary. And if you want any evidence of how strong this tradition is in America, I would recommend you to do what I've been doing recently, because I have a 7-year-old daughter, is watch a Walt Disney movie, an animated movie. I mean, that is the end of every single movie. Is it looks like everything's defeated, but all you have to do is realize that you've got the power yourself through some magical pulling on your own resources to solve your own problems. And financially, MLMs are entirely dependent on maintaining that faith that you can do it. It's all down to you. All the obstacles you faced in your life can be overcome if only you believe in yourself, and convince other people that they too can be as successful as long as they believe themselves. So, and by the way, if you don't succeed, it's all your own fault. And so that is, I think, the wellspring of this incredible need to attack critics, because for anyone seeking to recruit new recruits, the possibility that somebody trying to figure out what's the deal with this MLM, with whatever it may be, the possibility that they may encounter somebody on the internet telling them, hey, it doesn't work, it ain't going to be what they're promising you, I tried it and it didn't work, that kind of thing, even a modest impact on the number of people that can potentially be recruited based on the way the MLMs are financially structured, it's huge. It's huge. So let's talk. I want to talk quickly, and I'll try not to repeat the sorts of things that Peter was talking about. I mean, NXIVM is obviously now notorious, but there's certainly plenty of MLMs that are much smarter about avoiding legal trouble themselves, let alone criminal trouble and collapsing and being sentenced for 120 years. We can all hope for that for the MLMs of our choice, but it isn't necessarily going to happen a lot of the time. But in terms of defending yourself against the kinds of threats, both legal and harassment, and potentially much worse, that you may face, as Alonda did, let me quickly touch upon a number of things. There's not a hell of a lot of time to tell you about it, but let me break this down. Obviously one of the primary ones is defamation. There are other claims. Copyright, trade secret was a big one. And taking a playbook from Scientology. I've represented both cults. There's a cult called people who got out of cults, like the Art of Living Foundation, which is very, very big worldwide, based in India. And I won some important anonymity cases there. Signature Management Team was an MLM case, an anonymity case. Both of those, in addition to, some of them had defamation, and some of them solely were copyright, trade secret, whatever, as the basis for suing. But when we talk about legal trouble, there are really two different kinds of trouble. The first is that you face a risk of being held liable, that you likely have to pay a damages award. That's obviously, what the lawsuit is claiming, and they're hoping to get a judgment, or at least convince you that they will get a judgment if you don't stop talking about them. And then the second issue is, even if they're not ultimately going to win legally, There's the expense of fighting, the expense of having to hire a lawyer and stuff like that. Now, as to both of these, and particularly the second one, it really depends what state you're in, but there are a number of states, California being one of the best, in which there's something called an anti-SLAPP statute. The anti-SLAPP statute, when you're talking about something of public import, as one often will be, although that might be an issue in the case, when you're talking about something of public import and somebody tries to stop you with a state law claim like defamation as opposed to copyright, which has a whole bunch of different issues, trade secret as well. The anti-SLAPP statute is something that, if you have hired a lawyer fast enough, is something that you might be able to use to get out of the case very early on and also get your attorney's fees back. And since the statute creates the possibility that you might win your attorney's fees back, it might also be something that you can use to help get a lawyer to, as I have done, I can't do it as much as I'd like to, take on an important case pro bono, with at least the partial hope that if I win attorney's fees, I can collect my fees from the wealthy MLM on the other side, as opposed to my often indigent client. So the anti-SLAPP statute is very good if you've got one in your state. And if you don't have one in your state, there's something I'm going to get to that might help you get there. One other thing to keep in mind is that your homeowner's policy, your insurance policy, believe it or not, may have a clause. It may be under an advertising clause or whatever, but look very carefully. The word libel or slander or defamation may be in your homeowner's policy. And if you're not making money on whatever it is you're doing on the internet, if you're not selling ads or anything else, if it's not a business, which will probably take you out of it, that clause may buy you a liability insurance that may enable you to get a lawyer. And I have actually been able to get some money out of insurance companies to represent people who have them. It is a disappearing clause. The insurance policies were written back before the internet made everyone into a publisher who could invoke the clause. And it may not be in your homeowner's policy. If you're shopping for homeowner's insurance or thinking about it, definitely something worth looking at. Obviously, before you publish, working as a traditional newspaper lawyer, the newspapers, at least when they had money, used to have lawyers that went over all their potentially libelous stories ahead of time and tried to sort of do what's called pre-pub review and try and massage them, not necessarily to change the import, but to have things be supported in a way that would make them more defensible in court. Obviously, if you can find a lawyer who's able to help you, whether either you can afford it or for free, that's very helpful. It's not possible to give generalized comments on defamation law, copyright law, and how you can avoid or get out of cases, but some important resources. One is the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You're going to be hearing from Joe in a few minutes, and he will tell you more about them. But they have both a lot of resources on learning about the law and that sort of thing, and they also have a referral service that may end up connecting you with someone like me. Another really good resource, another great organization who I've worked with a lot and has done me a lot of work, is the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. They're an older, originally more traditional reporters committee, financed by journalists, very well known. They have an excellent set of resources just in terms of basic kind of First Amendment law primers on defamation law, reporters' privilege, issues like that. So I highly recommend their resources. And I don't mean to imply that they're the only two. There are lots of excellent resources on the web that you can go to. Let me talk briefly about one other form of trouble, which is one that Alana was referencing, which is the risk of harassment and really worse, the risk of people threatening you and credibly convincing you that they may come after you. Now, it may well be that the people making those threats or whatever are part of a dark conspiracy that you're going to be able to prove, as Peter and the other people who prosecuted Nexium were able to prove. But in general, the MLMs have a fairly plausible deniability angle here. And it may even be true in the sense that I think that the MLM model creates a very great risk that the desperate people who believe that the only thing holding them back is the naysayers out there who are criticizing and telling me it's not going to work. Anyone who is trying, hanging on by their fingertips and trying to save their house from being evicted from their house and working some MLM thing, trying to make money and finding that their potential recruits are going on the internet and finding comments that are telling them, you know, hey, this thing doesn't work, don't fall for it. You know, any one of those people, and there will be hundreds of them, may decide that they really need to kind of terrify you into not into not saying what you're saying. So one form of protection that you may find is to go on the internet anonymously. That is, have a blog that talks about you but doesn't identify who you are. Now, technologically, if you're savvy enough and consistent enough and don't screw up ever, there are technological ways of protecting your anonymity. And if everyone used them, I'd be out of a job. But the reality is a lot of people don't realize that they need to use them until they've already sort of essentially put their identity out there, not directly that people can read it, but so it can be found out legally. And even the people who kind of know what they're doing, you know, someone who creates a VPN so no one can ever trace back, you know, where things are coming from, you know, unless, you know, I've represented people that are much more technically savvy than me and who try to protect themselves technologically, but in the back of their mind, there's, you know what, there's a time when I woke up in the middle of the night and I forgot to go through the VPN. And so they probably have my home IP address and they could probably figure out who I am, that kind of thing. So, you know, aside from the technological things, the question is, can you protect your anonymity legally? So very briefly, when you create, let's say, a website that doesn't identify you, there are any number of technological means that if you sent a subpoena to, let's say, Blogger or WordPress or one of the platforms that you might be working on, if they responded with the information that was being sought by the subpoena, a savvy enough person might be able to figure out who you are if you haven't protected yourself technologically. That's most people will not have done so. And the same goes if you comment on a website anonymously. So how do they get a subpoena? What one can do is file what's called a Doe lawsuit. I'm going to file a lawsuit, and I've represented this guy Doe over and over again. I am going to sue John Doe, the unknown person who wrote blog X and said Y, and I'm going to sue John Doe in court, and then I'm going to ask the court for permission to subpoena Google or Automatic, which is the parent of WordPress, or one of the platforms, and subpoena their identifying information so I can serve the complaint on the person who really did it. And that's something I have really specialized in defending. And the first thing that you need to know is if you get any kind of email, if you do this, if you get any kind of an email or notice from your company, as you usually will, although they don't have to do this, they'll say, we've gotten a complaint has been filed against you, a subpoena has been served against you. We're going to give up your information if within the next 21 days or 10 days or 2 months or whatever, usually pretty short time, you don't file a quote unquote motion to quash in court to stop the subpoena from being enforced. And there are also, and I won't even get into it, there are criminal search warrants and subpoenas. There's a lot more protections there, but the same thing could happen on the criminal side. At that point, what you really need to do is find a lawyer really fast. Well, there's me, and there are others out there. EFF has a referral service, and the first thing you need to do is just let them know that you're looking for a lawyer, whatever. One of the things, so
2 minutes, 2-minute warning.
Okay, so one of the key things to understand about it, so there's good news and bad news. Let me give you the good news, maybe 1 minute for the good news and 1 minute for the bad news. The good news, thank you, Bill. The good news is by virtue of your anonymity, you may buy yourself essentially California levels of legal protection. Or if you're foreign, as the people were in the Art of Living case, which I did, if you're foreign, you'll essentially buy yourself American First Amendment protections that may not exist in your own home country. And I've had a lot of foreigners who do that. You're on Blogger, the subpoena is in a California court because that's where Blogger is. And so the SLAPP statute applies, and there's kind of a similar thing about subpoenas in California. And the American First Amendment applies, even though it may not apply in India or wherever you may be. So that's the good news. And the SLAPP, so not only are you getting a substantive level of protection, you're getting the potential of getting your attorney's fees. So that's a huge advantage that anonymity may buy you if you're not already in California anyways, not to mention the fact that, it's not terrible. People can still harass you, but if they threaten you and say they're going to come to your house and kill you, it certainly gives you a certain amount of peace of mind that they don't actually know where you live. I would say the bad news about anonymity is, you know, anonymity is an editorial choice. That's actually the source of part of the legal protection. You have the right to choose not to identify who you are when you write the articles that you write. But from a polemical point of view, you're opening yourself up to the criticism that, oh, this guy is claiming that it didn't work for him, but he didn't really, you know, maybe it enables them to make up stories about you. First, maybe that you never actually were at the MLM at all, or there's a reason you didn't succeed, or even worse, that you're actually been hired by the competitors or the competitive MLM, or, you know, if it's an MLM that does some kind of drug, that you've been hired by big pharma and you're essentially a sock puppet. That's the disadvantage. And I'll stop there. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And I think between you and Peter, getting into the real meat and potatoes of what to do next, which is really important for our attendees. Finally, we have with us Joe Mullen from the well-known Electronic Frontier Foundation. Joe is a policy analyst there and will share some of what EFF has done that could be helpful. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks a lot, Bill. I'm really glad to have been invited to this conference. I've been interested in MLM since well before I got to EFF. I have over a decade of experience in journalism before I joined EFF in 2018. So thanks for calling us well known. I'm still going to introduce the organization I work for a bit. The Electronic Frontier Foundation is the biggest civil liberties organization that's focused on the digital world. EFF was founded in 1990. We have over 30,000 members who pay us dues. We get most of our income comes from individuals, you know, making small donations, most of them. And we're based in San Francisco, California. And EFF, we fight to protect your right to privacy and your right to free speech in the online world. So what I'd like to do today is, and I'm going to share some, I don't really have slides, but I have some websites, and I'm going to share my screen at a point because I want to address today people who want to speak out online and the people who work with them, like the journalists and the attorneys who are coming here today. We're here to help those people. And I think one thing I've learned from this conference already is that it's just so important that people speak out about their own experiences. There's no replacement for that. And there's been kind of an incredible growth of that, it seems, in this space recently. And it's pretty inspiring to me. So we have a group of about 20 lawyers at EFF and about 9 or 10 people on the activism team. I'm not a lawyer, I'm on the activism team. And several of those 20 lawyers are intellectual property lawyers. We have an IP group that's a big part of our legal practice. And that's something that makes EFF special too. Well, why is that? Because way back in 1990, this is, you know, at the very beginnings of what we now know as the World Wide Web, it became clear that intellectual property laws and really our nation's sort of overgrown, overpowered corporate view of IP law was going to allow for IP to be used as censorship. And it's no coincidence that the last two attorneys you just heard from who have defended and worked with people speaking out about MLMs had their clients attacked by copyright, trademark, trade secrets. And in fact, Nexium even was able to really harness the US patent system in some ways, more as a part of their propaganda. But still, I mean, the IP system was something they used. And so EFF has developed a particular expertise in this. So what does EFF do? We do technology and law and activism. And today I'm going to focus on the law and the activism part of our work. In addition to, you know, actually litigating and taking cases, one of the things we do is we try to make the law usable and understandable for everyday people, because we don't think you should have to have a lawyer or even speak to an EFF lawyer before you want to speak out. So, you know, it's great to see a new generation of creators like Alonda and some of the folks we heard from yesterday in the discussion doing that. I'm going to share my screen and show some resources that might hopefully be useful. Okay, is that showing? Is my browser screen showing there?
It is, yes, it is.
Okay, great. So now we created way back, some of this I'm going to start with some stuff that's admittedly dated. This is our legal guide for bloggers, and it was published in 2005. But it still has some information that's pretty relevant. This is when people started using blogs to become citizen journalists. They didn't want to wait for professional journalists to give attention to the issue that they cared about. And this is something that's continued up to today. I mean, what I think Alonda is doing research, finding and verifying facts and publishing them in the medium that works for her, that is really citizen journalism. And we published one of the earliest guides as to how to do this online and how you could, there's no way to say, you know, no one can guarantee you, this is the United States of America, that you're not gonna ever be sued. But there are ways to think defensively and be in a good position so that if, you know, God forbid, you do end up having to call EFF or Josh Colton because you got threatened or sued, you're in the best possible position. So this legal guide for bloggers, even today, it's not a bad place to start. It has, you know, some of the basics on copyright law, defamation law, and it's a good place to start. Next thing I want to show you is, and I'll make these links available in whatever resource document comes up. And I also just want to say my email is very simple. It's joe@eff.org, just joe@eff.org. So if people have questions about my presentation or think EFF may be of help to them, please feel free to reach out to me directly. So then we have, oh, this is part of our blogger's guide. You know, there's a brief on online defamation law. And so this kind of gives you some of the basic elements of it. So it's good to know just the basics, even though, again, you know, none of this is a guarantee that, you know, people are not going to sue you for defamation. That's just not possible to do. So we've created things like this white paper, which is called Avoiding Gripes About Your Gripe Site. So like a lot of, you know, for a long time now, this is giving that fictitious example of Badco Inc. You think Badco Inc. is a bad actor and you've developed a website to tell the world why. So this gives you some rules to follow so that they wouldn't have a credible claim for something like trademark infringement or copyright infringement. And of course, the media people use has changed over time. And if you wanted to complain about a company today, people are much more likely to use social media platforms or an independent creator platform. So, you know, we think about people on Reddit and like Alonda's programs on YouTube, and of course, people using Instagram as well. So this is always going to be changing over time, but it's interesting how much of this advice actually holds up. And also people still do use the web. You know, this is from a Google search I did just this morning. I found this website doing some searches on some well-known MLMs. This one's called Amway, The Dream or the Scheme. And it's, you know, that title of the blog post is Why I Think Amway Sucks. Apologies for some of the language here. This is not my language. This is a website I found this morning. But this person wants to tell the world, in my informed opinion, Amway sucks donkey nuts. So you don't need to be, you know, this is people exercising their right to free speech, and they want to talk about negative experiences they've had with various companies. And you have the right to do that, and EFF is here to help you do that. And so we have some educational materials that can be useful along those lines. Now, like I said, so there's three things when it comes to speaking out online. You know, EFF wants to defend your right to speak out, number one. And number two, we want to defend your right to use copyrighted and trademark material of other people as appropriate to make your point, because you have fair use rights. You have the right to use that material. Sometimes it's impossible to make your points without using that material. But unfortunately, fair use law it's overly complicated, and it's not as clear or easy to use as we would like it to be. So we fight for your fair use rights because those are your free expression rights. And then thirdly, we also, and I'm not going to talk too much about this because Josh did a great job of introducing the topic. We also fight for your right to speak out anonymously. You have the right to speak out under your own name, and that can be incredibly powerful, but some people just don't feel like they're in a position to do that because of feeling insecure, whether it's because of threats or just because of relationships in their friends and family networks. So sometimes people need to speak out anonymously, and we also defend people's rights in that area. So let's kind of bring it up to the present day for a minute now, because I showed some stuff that was sort of from a bit based on what the internet and people's online speech looked like, you know, in several years ago. So this is a white paper we just published in December of 2020, and it's about how YouTube's content ID system actually discourages fair use and dictates what we see online. This is a white paper that has three, it's by my colleague on the activism team, Catherine Trendacosta, and it has three case studies that are not people talking about MLMs, but it's an interesting paper, and it talks about how YouTube's algorithms and copyright strike system can actually be weaponized in order to censor critical speech. And I think that the way that it goes beyond, we're only getting some of the iceberg here. I mean, I think Alonda's presentation and the screenshot she showed of the threats and strikes she got was a perfect representation of this. So, you know, the ways people speak online are changing, and also the forms of censorship that they're up against are also changing. So, you know, in a way, it's easier than ever to speak out, but things like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is our primary kind of internet copyright law, it states to 1996, it also has made it pretty easy for people to, you don't need to file a lawsuit to try to censor someone, because they've compelled the platforms to make rules that don't really favor critical speakers. They tend to favor copyright owners, and the rules don't favor fair use. So EFF is always there pushing back. So, you know, I'll give you an example. We are working with someone right now who did speak out against an MLM on YouTube, and she used video clips of an MLM executive to make her point. So, you know, the MLM made certain claims online that the person we're working with, the YouTube creator, thought were false. And so she captured clips of the MLM executive saying things that revealed that some of the MLM's material were not true. So she got copyright strikes from the MLM. And she got 2 copyright strikes. And if she gets a third, her account will be deleted. So there's a system where she can make a counterclaim, but it's not that simple to do. And so she now has an EFF attorney working with her to file some serious counterclaims that will get those strikes taken down, we hope, and protect her account. And another reason we publish white papers like this is because we want to pressure the companies to make the rules better for all users. That's one of the reasons that we distribute papers like this to the platforms themselves and to policymakers. And Bill, I'd just give me like a 2-minute warning or something if I start to run out of time here.
You're just about there, just close to 2 minutes.
Okay, great. So, you know, another thing is we actually litigate. We can't take every case. A lot of the cases we refer out, but I want to give an example here where we just last week, we sued Proctorio. Proctorio they have educational software that they probably call proctoring software, but we call it student surveillance software. They monitor students, and some students get forced to use this software, unfortunately, by their universities. So Proctorio, we think, has abused some of the DMCA process, and we have sued them. There's a provision in the DMCA called 512F, which says if you make a false copyright claim, a misrepresentation in your DMCA notice, you can actually be liable for damages. We are trying to put some real teeth into Section 512F because we want there to be we want the other side to have some skin in the game. We want there to be a penalty when you send false copyright takedown notices to creators. And, you know, we know usually it's people making critical speech that are on the receiving end of those kind of copyright claims. It's not people out promoting a new MLM, typically. EFF has no position on the issue of MLMs itself. We are there to defend your right to speak in the online world, but it's, you know, the people who want to promote or create MLMs tend to not have a problem asserting their First Amendment rights, but it's people like Alonda and the other independent creators that we want to be here and stand up for. And then Josh already covered, the last thing I'll say is anti-SLAPP laws are important. That's what will let you hire a good lawyer like Josh to take your case. And we fight for anti-SLAPP laws. We'd love there to be a federal law. We're working on it. And we fight for anti-SLAPP laws state by state. We fought for laws in Texas and Virginia. And that's another part. We don't end it with your legal issue. We want to do impact litigation that applies to the next user who has your problem. And we do activism because we want to make the world safer for free speech. So thanks a lot.
Well, ending on wanting to make the world safer for free speech seems like a really good last phrase. Thank you so much, Joe. And if I could ask the other panelists to come on, and also Doug Brooks. Doug is going to do the Q&A on this session. We will end approximately around 2 or so, take a break, and go into our final session, which I think you'll find to be very interesting. Doug?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. Thanks to all the panelists. We have a lot of questions. From Dave, we have a question. We already lost a major video creator last year. What measures should be taken now to still respect anyone's decision to step back from content creation, but still maintain the educational resources? I don't know if that's with in anyone's ballpark. And is it technologically feasible? I know there's something called the Internet Wayback Machine, where they archive old websites. But is there a way of archiving something from someone who's decided to get out of the content creation business?
I mean, I'm not fully sure I understand the question, but I mean, in theory, you could take stuff that other people had written and post it yourself, but that's potentially a copyright violation. So one's ability to maintain material without the permission of the other person is, I think it really is kind of fact dependent. The Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, does a lot of stuff more or less, and they have a number of legal protections that may, at the end of the day, not hold up, but they do, and they do a lot of good work. It's possible that you could kind of let them know that it's an interesting thing that you would like them to flag, but I don't know how that works. Joe might have a better idea.
Yeah, so the Internet Archive runs the Wayback Machine, and the founder of the Internet Archive is on EFF's board. It's another nonprofit also in San Francisco, so we are proud to stand with them. They are part of the Internet Freedom Industrial Complex that we are also part of. If you want your material to be out in the world, share it and make it clear that you're sharing it. Use something like a Creative Commons license, and if for whatever reason your site goes down, I mean, make it clear that you are sharing it with the world and handing it off, and that's one way to do it. I think that's. Yeah,
I can give you a good example. The Art of Living Foundation case that went on for years involved a cult in India, and essentially one of the guys who was being sued at a certain point was just kind of sick of it, and we were able to kind of hand off his work to another. I mean, it was anonymous. It made no leave here, and that's one of the advantages of anonymity. But sort of, it is possible to do this. Anything can be done with the permission of the person who created all the content. The issue would be, can you do it against their will? I think a serious problem can be when somebody settles a lawsuit and agrees to take stuff down. That causes all kinds of complications. Incidentally, it's very difficult to figure out a way to settle an anonymous lawsuit anonymously, but I have managed to do it. Takes a lot of tricky legwork.
A related and perhaps flip side issue is when a litigation adversary has materials, video materials that they had published or posted online, which now they have come to realize is going to hurt them in the litigation, and all of a sudden the stuff disappears. And when you ask them for it, they say, well, we don't have it anymore. So I'm facing that a lot now with this Korean cult church that I'm litigating against.
From Katie, we have a question. Do you think it makes a difference to interact with the hate comments, like bringing facts and pointing out how their arguments are illogical?
I mean, personally, I think it really just depends on what you're aiming to do. I mean, if you're aiming to persuade the person who made the comments that they're wrong, good luck. But that's true in a lot of things in life, not just hateful. If you're trying to, I think the question is, who's your audience? If what you're trying to do is persuade that person who's on the fence about joining an MLM, whether they should join, that can be very effective. I think, it's all a matter of how good an advocate you are.
Alanda, you have to open your mic.
I sure do. I have received, of course, there's certain videos that I've made that just attracts hate comments for whatever reason. And the way I always look at it is I realize that they are indoctrinated into whichever MLM, and I'll just put them all under the same umbrella. And I have just chosen, and it's like, it doesn't do me any good to try to go back and forth with them. They have to be at a point where they're open to hearing anything that I would have to say, because otherwise it's like, tit for tat, tit for tat. And I'm not here for that. I'm not here for them. I'm here for people who are ready and are open to, realizing what they've gotten involved in. So that's the stance I take.
There's a question from an anonymous attendee. How do you maintain anonymity and protect yourself when speaking out about MLMs? It seems like their members could hack and stalk you to figure out who you are anyway.
Well, I mean, obviously to some degree that may depend on their technological sophistication. I can't discount the possibility that there are MLMs that will be able to find you, especially depending on how good you are, sort of not leaving clues about who you are in the things that you say and things like that. I mean, people can be much more revealing about themselves than they understand that they are. But yeah, I mean, I definitely have defended. I've been able successfully to defend the anonymity legally, and with the sense from my clients that was enough to maintain the safety. It also depends what you mean by anonymity, right? I mean, you can also, anonymity can serve different purposes. You may not want your boss to know that you were once stupid enough to fall for an MLM scheme, which is the case for one of my clients. That was really his main concern, was that, not follow him around now that he's like a successful person, having gone and done other things in his life, to know that as a young person, he fell for Amway and whatever. And then he became an MLM critic in general, but his own story is part of his blog. Somebody, and I'll just give my proudest example in this case, somebody asked me about it. Somebody asked about it in the Q&A, and you can look more up on my website about the signature management team case. Is a case that I took all the way to the Sixth Circuit, in which I actually lost a copyright case. They won the copyright case, but even having won it, they were unable to learn the identity of my client, which is something of a high watermark legally for the protection of anonymity. So yes, it is possible to protect it.
Dave asks, how can someone help a fellow advocate facing a defamation lawsuit or coordinated actions to silence a critic?
Send money. I don't know. I mean, certainly, there are all kinds of ways one can support a person, including just letting his lawyer know that you're out there and may be able to provide, corroborating information. Emotional support, I'm sure, is extremely important. I'm going to defer to Alanda, who maybe from the inside can tell you more than I can what would be helpful.
I don't really know if I have an answer for that. I think one of the best things is to be able to, point out resources, like the EFF and everything, Truth and Advertising, where they can go and get help, legally. And I think, we put in front of the resources, Monica Hayworth's Facebook group, very supportive environment, because some of these groups, it can get kind of vicious in there. And I really feel like people need like a safe space, because I firmly believe that people leave MLMs and they have psychological damage and they're not healed. And we really don't have a support system for dealing with that damage of them. When we hear cult, we usually don't attribute it to MLMs. But I'm going to say MLM is a cult. You go through the same thing. And I think that we need more support in the mental health community. So maybe there are some people that can step in that are involved in mental health to be there to help us.
Well, I want to say something. I mean, the mindset that a person who's been in a cult or been in an MLM is someone who's been very much sucked into an environment where they're hearing one message all the time. So for anyone who is either thinking of leaving or has left, just the existence of more people who've gone through what they've been through and can confirm their reality is, I think, psychologically hugely important, which is why these blogs are important, which is why it's important for them to be out there. And the cross, as I understand it, there's kind of a cross support system of people who've gotten out of cults and MLMs to support each other across cults, because people have become very isolated often when they're in an MLM or when they're in a cult. And so that's very helpful. And just to give you a very concrete legal example, in the signature management team case, in which there's an issue of sort of, you know, what is the reason why anonymity is important in these cases, not just as an editorial choice, but literally as a reason to save people from the possible threats that they might face. An ex-MLM member who I had defended in another case, whose anonymity had been stripped before I got to him, was able to put in a declaration about the threats he received from people who knew where he lived, to give like credence to the idea that if you disclose who this person is and where they live, they're going to get threats, like real threats, telling them that, you know, I know who your children are and where you live and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of legal, you know, that kind of support in the legal context, but just generally, just convincing people that they're fighting the good fight and they have brethren and sisters in arms that agree with them and want us all to succeed in that mission.
On a related point, in the community of ex-members of this Korean cult that I've been litigating against, a group of former high-level members of the church have sort of found one another and exchange information and views. They've set up some Zoom calls among themselves, on one of which I was asked to talk about what to do if they get a subpoena. And it reminds me that the church had issued subpoenas to Google and Zoom, trying to get the identities of anonymous posters. And the response that came from Zoom was a masterpiece of go to hell. I mean, it was 3 pages of every conceivable reason why Google was not going to give them any support or help whatsoever. Zoom, maybe to its credit, completely ignored their subpoena. They didn't even bother to answer. But Google was first and foremost in saying, no, you don't get anything on this.
And just on that note, the behavior of the intermediaries is so important. We see the internet through intermediaries. And that's why EFF also has projects like Who Has Your Back? So like we rate the intermediaries on when they get, you know, a warrant from police, how do they respond? You know, do they give users notice? Do they give users appeal rights, a chance to intervene? We have to pressure those intermediaries to do the right thing. When they do the right thing, as Peter notes, it makes a real difference when it comes to user rights.
You know, I have a question for you, Joe. Someone is asking, so glad to know you and Joe and EFF, but would you not be bound to defend, say, Amway in specifically attacking an individual who is shining a light on it?
We're not bound to defend anyone. I'm not totally sure what the person means. I mean, I would say this, it's like,
you're defending the free speech rights of everybody, then that would that include MLMs or attacking critics?
Sure. I mean, to some degree, yeah, we believe in the old dream that sometimes the best solution for a problem is more speech. You know, I will say I asked him that there's also legislative solutions to thing. I actually asked a question about that in an earlier panel. But you know, one thing, there's a lot of talk right now about like on social media, you know, how do we get hate speech off social media? There are big questions now about content moderation, right? And no one has a perfect answer. All the hate and ugliness in the world will be reflected in the online world because the online world is everyone now. But the good things are reflected too. And what we're worried about is when there's content moderation systems that are very harsh and overbearing and restrictive of speech, we tend to see, and it's not a coincidence, the losers in that game are going to tend to be Alonda Carter, and it's not going to be Herbalife and Amway. And they're not knocking down our doors, you know? And so we choose who we defend, but and it's not a free for all. Everyone has content moderation. Those are private companies. We don't tell them how to do it. But we want an online world that's fair to speakers, and we're not too worried about accidentally defending the speech of bad folks. They're not really knocking down our doors. It's not a big problem for us.
Well, in this context, the whether or not the landscape has changed in terms of public attitudes about white supremacy. I mean, this issue came up maybe a dozen years ago when the ACLU, of which I am a proud card-carrying member, the ACLU took it upon itself to defend the neo-Nazis who wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois. And I'm wondering whether or not, if the same issue arose today, whether or not the ACLU would take the same position, or whether or not the landscape has changed.
That's actually not a hypothetical. I mean, the ACLU actually defended the rights of white supremacists to demonstrate in Charlottesville. I mean, people say it like the ACLU is what it used to be, but it's not a hypothetical question. They did defend the rights. I mean, it's a very specific question about whether they would be able to have a demonstration at a particular place that other people wouldn't be able to go to, et cetera. But they did the old-fashioned free speech thing, despite people suggesting they don't do that anymore.
Well, but of course, in Charlottesville, there were very fine people on both sides.
Don't get me started.
Here's a question. What do you think about TikTok banning MLMs? Should other platforms do the same? I know there's been some talk about
No
this.
use. They're still out there. The MLMs are out there. The distributors are out there. It was all a bunch of lip service. That's all it was.
Speech coming from friends and family and people's networks. I mean, the way MLMs work are a case in point about how they're not going to get content moderated off of a platform. It's just not possible when the pitch is coming from your aunt and your uncle. On the note of TikTok, I actually want to mention it's important. One good thing you can do is understand the kind of how the content moderation and appeals process works better. And we have a website called onlinecensorship.org that we're actually revamping to give people information about how appeals and content moderation works on the websites. Again, we're not saying how it should work, but there's a new generation of platform, like TikTok is the prime example. We're going to have some really detailed information about how appeals and content moderation works on TikTok and other platforms, just so people know.
I will say the MLM coaches are out there selling courses on how to use TikTok to shill your MLM products.
Bill, I think have we reached our ending point?
We've borrowed 2 minutes from the coffee break. But this session, every session has brought in a lot of useful and helpful information and even hope. And this session is no different, since this actually is information about people's behavior and risk. So thank you all very much. We'll be back at 2:10.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you all. Good luck, everyone.